Welcome, everyone, or should I say good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and maybe even good night. This is the first time the RSA conference has hosted College Day virtually. So for you that are around the globe, we welcome you and we're grateful that you are showing up here today. We're excited to talk to the future cyber warriors. I've got some excellent veterans behind me. I'd like to take just 1 second to tell a little plug for RSA Conference, which is in its 30th year, probably older than most of you actually. But RSA Conference started 30 years ago to talk about all the pressing problems that were happening in cybersecurity, and it has only grown from the 44 people where we started to where we are today. It's at the intersection of business, technology, academia, and nonprofits. This morning, we are so blessed to have an incredible panel of CISOs from people from the media sector, from the technology sector, and from the defense sector. And they all have different perspectives and they're here to share them. What I'd like to do is just ask you to go ahead and put any of your comments and questions into the chat. Please observe our code of conduct and let's get started. So to get us started, to kick us off, I'd like to turn it over to John Scimone and just talk about, John, why cybersecurity and where do you see the jobs going today?
Cybersecurity, because it's probably the most fun and challenging and satisfying profession on the planet. Usually you can pick one of those three, maybe two, but not all three. But cybersecurity is all three. And then, as a bonus, it pays pretty decent and people need it and value it, and there's job opportunity. So it's probably 15 different reasons to get into cyber. For me personally, ironically, many of those things weren't the case. Back many years ago when I started in the profession, it wasn't actually even really a profession, but I still at the time found it fun and had a passion for it. And that's why I pursued it to begin with.
Before we actually pass on the mic, I forgot to say that you should also mention where you're working from. But the good news is right behind you is a great advertisement for the company, but I figured you should just throw in your title. So when we get to the other two, so go ahead, John, can you please provide your title and company as well?
Yeah, I was gonna say my branding team would not allow me to have you get away with not knowing where I'm currently sitting. But I do work for Dell Technologies. I'm the Chief Security Officer here and I've had the privilege of being in that role for about the last 4 years.
Excellent. Mike, can you share a little bit about where you work, even though people might not recognize your background either?
Yeah, it's a little overt, right? So Mike Gordon, I'm the Chief Information Security Officer for Lockheed Martin.
And can you talk a little bit about what you see as the job market in cybersecurity today?
Oh, I think the job market is endless right now. There are jobs everywhere in cybersecurity, and I think there's something for everybody in this field. And I think a lot of folks can get intimidated by cybersecurity because there's a lot of really hardcore ones and zeros people, reverse engineering malware, offense and defense kind of capabilities. And we tend to, I'm going to be the man of many hats today. So we tend to look for the unicorns in this field, right? These people who are able to do just about everything. But that's not really the case, right? I think there's a lot of different skills and specialties, and we need people who are good at IT. And I think we need people who are good at governance, risk compliance, policies, and just understanding the world around us so that we can, defend our corporations and defend our nation.
That is great, Mike. And I don't even know how you're going to top that, Andrea, but I'm going to turn the question over to you. Can you share a little bit about yourself? And then maybe talk about the training that's happening for cybersecurity professionals. What's the spectrum?
Okay. So my name's Andrea Bel. I am the least impressive background, but I work for a media company, NBC Universal. Our company wears a lot of hats. You know us for Saturday Night Live broadcasts, but we also do theme parks. So Universal Studios, Sports Engine, Fandango, you name it. NBC Universal probably is involved and invested. So it means my job is never dull, just like Mike and John's as equally never dull. I think I may take the question a little different from training. I am maybe the person on the panel. I didn't set out to have a career in cybersecurity. I think, like John said, it wasn't really a career path when I graduated from college. But I've always loved solving tough problems. And actually that's how I got involved. There was a tough problem and I got brought in. And I think when you think about how you've grown your career or how you've been training, there is a lot out there now. There's so much more than when I started out in the field. But I'll tell you the thing that I think both helps me feel energized and keeps me wanting to do cybersecurity is, I will say I credit Mike Gordon for part of my development, sitting at the table with people who are so smart and passionate and you all want to solve a challenge together. That type of on-the-job training, being willing to ask questions, dive in, take a chance, and then make a difference. That's right. The man of many hats, he did not do that at the table when we were sitting there before. So normally he wore one hat. But that at the end of the day, cyber is the ultimate team sport. And if you're willing to come in and bring your knowledge right to the table today, and then figure out what you want to learn. And then you can start to pursue it through, you want to learn more about cloud, go to a cloud guru, right? Their training programs are great. The SANS training is amazing. And then companies have rotational programs, and I'm sure we'll talk about those later. But I think the idea of being willing to throw your hat in the ring, I guess, is what I will say is the best training for a cybersecurity professional.
Yeah. Hey, Andrew, I'll just add it. It's really been a privilege to work with folks like Andrea and John. And I think as folks get into this field, we realize it is a very tight-knit community. Every company needs cyber people. Unfortunately, there's not a whole lot of cyber people in the world. So there tends to be about 1 or 2 degrees of separation. And we all know each other pretty well. And that is a great thing too, is building the network and building the relationships and comparing notes. I mean, the three of us work for 3 incredibly different companies, but we face a common problem. And those are, adversaries who are really, really intent on breaking into our businesses for different reasons. And the skills that people can bring to help fend them off are endless. So it is a privilege to work with you guys.
Yeah, and I like the team analogy too, because it does get into the notion that it's an active role. I mean, there's very few professions where you can compete and win, or you can compete and lose. It's like, just like if you all play sports, most people play sports for pleasure and dream about playing sports to get paid and do it professionally, and 99% of people can't. Cybersecurity is very similar. I mean, we all play against the same team. It's literally the same hacking groups potentially hacking into each of our companies. It's highly competitive. It's highly complex. It's highly challenging. But it can be super rewarding, when you band together and actually do effectively against some of these challenges, which are really important to not just our companies, but the customers we support, which represent a broad swath of society.
I think that's so fascinating that all 3 of you mentioned A, team playing, and B, that this is a network and that you have to build. And what I'd love for you to do is to just share a little bit more about, this market has changed, the number of people in this industry has changed. How do you actually build your network?
Well, I think all of us probably have similar approaches, but there's a limited number of experts in this field, even today, and the field's probably 10 years old. And so I think we tend to take an approach of train the trainer, and we take chances on hiring folks in Lockheed based on how they think, right? That was my original purpose of my HAL hat, right? It's really, how do you address tough problems? And so we tend to interview people, and we're looking for that analytical mindset, not so much detailed overt knowledge about cybersecurity, because I think the college world has evolved. There was no such thing. I think I can speak for John and Andrew. None of us had there was no such thing as a cyber course when we were in college. There wasn't even such a thing as cyber, right? And so many of us have all come from different walks of life and different careers, and learned the skill because of that, how thinking, how do I solve this problem? And so we tend to look for that, and we tend to try to grow a talent pipeline from early career professionals into senior professionals, and then supplement that if we can by hiring an occasional expert. But there's only a few of them to go around, and it's a very competitive market for it today.
Yeah, so I'll piggyback off Mike. I think what you're talking about, building your network. I think there's lots of things, and maybe you're not sure you want to be in cyber. You're still figuring out what that career path is. any company that offers a type of rotation where you can rotate in, I want, at the end of the day, if I can get anyone who works at NBC Universal to think a little bit more about cyber, it helps us. So I will say, I welcome those rotational opportunities, and I would encourage you, if you get a chance, it helps you understand the business, which makes you a better cyber professional also. So that idea of being able to rotate and really think through, and then from a cyber, like a leadership perspective, I want to develop as many advocates and champions as I can. So even if you don't end up in cyber, I want you to always have cyber on your brain. And when all else fails, I'm not ashamed to bribe people via happy hours or fun activities. So, that's when you talk about building your network, it's about being willing to go out and not share, details, but talk about those common problems and items and share those and build up. And there's all sorts of groups and both in person and they went a little bit to online over the past year, but I'll say just that idea of being willing to share your experiences with a group and open up to all of that. Those are all great ways to not only build your network, but you learn a lot in the process too.
Yeah, it's not directly related to networking, but I think Mike started to hit on a really key point that relates to a topic I get a lot of questions on as I talk to college students or those entry level professionals. And it's, what skills do you need and what knowledge is most important? And what Mike said is super important. I mean, it may be the most important thing you'll hear in the session. It's really about attitude, aptitude. And as you think about where to spend your time and potentially preparing for a cybersecurity career, be really thoughtful about what you're learning and what is perishable versus what's going to be lasting. Because a lot of times you might get a certification or a class and how to run this specific vendor's tool to do this specific function, like tool X, of how to scan a network for vulnerabilities. And, those skills are important in the near term and they are tangible and real, but at the same time, the things that are lasting are the knowledge and the experience you might gain around why is vulnerability scanning important? What's that tool actually doing? And it may be a totally different experience even 5 years from now, how you do vulnerability scanning, but did you truly learn the essence of that function or did you really just learn how to run a tool? And so it's a little bit nuanced, but thinking about the skills and knowledge that you're gaining and really focusing on trying to gain skills and knowledge and importantly, experience that isn't going to be perishable, because in particular, this industry is changing and moving at such a fast rate that you can be an expert today in something and, a year and a half from now, your knowledge is completely irrelevant. And so that's just a really important concept, I think, as you think about what classes to take, what certifications to pursue. And certainly us as hiring managers, those are some of the elements that we're considering when we look at the resume, and then more importantly, beyond the resume, at how you learn, how you problem solve, and how lasting that's going to be in contributing to a role with any of our companies.
One of the things that I've talked to all of you about, Dell Technologies and Lockheed are obvious picks for cybersecurity, but NBC Universal, like you were talking about in the beginning, Andrea, is very different. And you kind of don't realize this. As Mike hit on the very first point, is that this is now cybersecurity is in every facet of our lives as we become more interconnected. But the weird part is, like, how do you find out about going into places that are not traditional or easy fits, like a technology company? How do you find out about those groups, and how do you start to look for the jobs in those markets?
So, I'll start and just say that, I think John maybe said, earlier that cybersecurity is a shared problem. There isn't an industry or a company that doesn't have the issue. And so, I'll be the first to say I wasn't necessarily someone who was out looking. My heritage is from Lockheed Martin. I am very proud of that heritage. Wasn't looking to leave. An opportunity came, and the opportunity that presented itself was, we have this company here and we want to transform, and we realize that we need to address the threat. It is in front of us, and we have to go through. I mean, when you think about it, adversaries, we see that e-crime has grown exponentially lately, right? That attacks regardless of your industry. But we also have, very areas of interest in terms of, news reporters. You think about the election cycle as things have gone through. There's a lot of threats that you may not think through. And so I think when you begin to talk to companies, you start to realize what they have worth protecting. And most companies aren't going to be in business if they don't have something worth protecting. And I think that's where, the idea, especially, I'm so proud of my Lockheed heritage because of things like the cyber kill chain and intelligence-driven defense. And then those have further expanded and become, the MITRE attack framework and things like that, that we all can use and have that common vocabulary, even though we bring different business challenges to it. Different business approach, different, legacy environments, greenfield environments, and all of that. And that's part of the dynamics that make everyone's job really interesting. So, I would just say that there are very few places that can say they have no need for security or cybersecurity. But I think the attack surface varies, the type, but the exact nature of how frequently you see threats and the type of it. But there's more commonality than you may anticipate.
Yeah, I'll chime in on that, Cecilia, and to Andrea's point. I think the interesting thing now, as Andrea said, is every company needs cybersecurity professionals, right? So find an industry that you're interested in. I work in Lockheed because I was interested in airplanes and aerospace, right? And I came into the company as an engineer to design stealth fighters, and I did that for a little while, and I ended up in this field of cybersecurity. And so it's just really cool for me to be a cyber defender for the things that I was interested in the first place. But if you're interested in the law, go find a law firm and work in cybersecurity there. If you're interested in the media, go work for NBC or a firm like that one. If you like IT and technology, go talk to John. But I think if you find the field that you're interested in and the industry that you're interested in, then that will help you want to stay passionate about what you're doing, and you'll be passionate as a network defender, defending that enterprise.
So I'm going to ask John a quick question about, oftentimes students are coming in and they don't necessarily know how to put their skills to something that translates to what you know or what you're looking for. Can you give some tips and ideas around, like we heard Andrea talking about problem solving and creative thinking? Those are kind of very big words. How can you actually prove that? If you're in college right now, what should students be doing to actually get their resume ready for you to see it and you to like what you see?
Yeah, I think demonstrated experience is important. So there's a difference between, learning a skill or acquiring a piece of knowledge and actually using it and proving that you know how to use and apply yourself in a meaningful way. And you can do that without any money. You can even do that without any education. I know people that have started, built networks in their basement and created their own little, hacking platforms and, set up hacking teams. What's really cool, I think a lot of colleges and clubs even have like hacking teams now where you can do things in legal ways to learn how to hack, learn how to defend. Just getting that experience and showcasing your problem solving, your analytical skills in a meaningful, experiential way, I think is important. One other thing I'd call out, what was just discussed in the prior question, I think is amazing. We're one of these professions where you can apply your skills in just the most diverse set of circumstances possible. So like for me, I used to work for the Defense Department. I worked and got to see and get on like planes and subs and all these amazing things. It was crazy. Then I went to Sony and I was on like a Hollywood studio around movie stars and seeing how the entertainment industry works. Now I'm working for a technology company, seeing how we just transform companies' lives with technology and data. But I'm still doing essentially the same job and applying the same knowledge, skills, and experience, but I'm impacting the world in totally different ways. What's cool is the inverse is also true, right? So cybersecurity needs a wide and diverse array of skills to actually successfully achieve cybersecurity programs goals. Like we need lawyers, we need communicators, we need finance people, we need project managers. We need all of these different types of trades and skill sets that aren't at their core cybersecurity specific, but we have blended professionals, as I call them, across the team where, a large percentage of our cyber warriors, their skills and experience that they gain, sometimes even their passion may not be the cyber piece of it, but they're helping cyber and our group achieve our goals because, again, we need policy writers. We need all these different skill sets. And so, again, that misperception that you have to be highly technical to get into cybersecurity or you really have to be into the ones and zeros, isn't true. And so I just think having that broader perspective is pretty foundational. And again, the field needs people. I mean, we have millions more jobs than actually people to fill them. So that's an important data point that we shouldn't lose sight of in this session.
Yeah, John, I just want to piggyback on that. We actually had an entry-level person who was trained as a journalist. They did have some background, but came in and was just really interested. But her research skills really enabled her to come in and learn how to do threat modeling and different. And so she took a skill that doesn't, when someone says you're a trained as a journalist, it doesn't naturally make you think, oh yeah, you're a perfect fit for cybersecurity. But she came in and became a security engineer. And so, I just want to, there is no limit. And I think it's that curiosity and willingness to learn and ask questions and open yourself up to that. So I do think there is that, exactly. There's nothing that should rule you out other than your own willingness to dig in and ask questions and learn.
Yeah, I agree. And getting that first job can be tough. I'm in an interesting spot right now. I've got a son who is got one more year of school, and so we're working on his resume. And this is high school and before college. But a high school resume and a college resume, they're not that much different, right? There's not a whole lot of real life job experience in there. And so I think it's important to emphasize your interest and your desires. Let that passion come through when you're putting yourself on paper in a resume or coming out in an interview, and demonstrating that you are very interested in the field. Certainly folks that we hire as early professionals are, we find the ones who seem to be interested at nighttime. What are you doing in the evening? Well, I'm building servers and I'm trying to secure this or that on my home network or whatever it may be. And there was a couple questions I think that have fit this broader question in the Zoom chat,
Yep.
Cecilia. So we had a question from George on how valuable are certifications early on, and I think different answers from different people you'll get on that one. For me, I think if you have a technical certification early on, you're a certified ethical hacker, or you've got some kind of hands-on keyboard certificate, that gives you a little bit of an edge when you don't have any career experience, right? It kind of, as I was saying before, it demonstrates that you had some passion for that and that you took some initiative to go learn it. A little bit of a longer answer is the day-to-day on the job. It doesn't help that much, right? But I think it helps you get in the door early on. There are sometimes there's requirements in certain DoD spaces and government spaces. You need to have certain certifications, but for the most part, I think it is an enabler. But get the ones that are respectable, ones that have true merit and really demonstrate that it's a hands-on keyboard exercise, that you knew what you were doing versus you were able to study and pass a test.
That is actually really telling. I think one thing I want to also add as a social scientist amongst this group is that those, and John did already mention that lawyers, and my background is in public affairs. That's where I have my master's. And there are many paths and many needs because we have to have these different perspectives. And Andrea touched on that as well, just bringing in a journalist. So we did get a question in for somebody that was asking about where do you find, so how do you, if people who are looking at cybersecurity careers, where should they go and where can they learn more about the field? Because it's a very broad field. So do you guys have some resources that you can think of? I know one that I recommend frequently is the NIST and CyberSeek map that has a very comprehensive channeling, so you can look at the different careers and you can see where you could go from, starting here to going there. But any ideas of where somebody that doesn't have a technical background, Mike, you're talking about like learning the hands-on skills with the keyboards. I think that I might recommend as a social scientist that you go to club meetings, you go to events like DEF CON, and you don't have to actually play some of the games, but you meet some of the people and you build that network there. Other thoughts, Andrea?
Yeah, I would say, I think the one thing I would mention is you can also look at internships. So for example, and I believe, I'll speak for NBC, but I know Lockheed and Dell have the same thing, right? But, if you're really interested and curious, but you're not sure you want to commit, internships are a great way. And if you go out to like the NBCU career site, you'll find there are both associate and internship programs, which are usually over the summer, but there's some flexibility. Those types of experiences are fairly well-rounded, and often we put in different types of jobs, across, what our needs are across all of the areas. So we could have one on awareness or policy, which might take more of someone with a communications background versus something more technical. We've talked about vulnerability management. That's always a place where interns can come in and really learn and understand what it's like to mobilize across a large enterprise. So I can't say enough about, if you have the ability, to pursue internships, to go after that, because it gives you both that opportunity to see on the job, do you really like this? Is this a team you want to be part of? Or is this not quite, maybe it's not exactly what you thought, and give you that information and feedback before you have to fully commit. And so I'll just say all sorts of, I even love, Twitter, following some professionals and articles and things like that, just keeping up on items. And then as you find a topic, it's pretty easy to go out and find, there are a plethora of training materials when you really want to do that deep dive as well. So I think sometimes just staying abreast of what's going on and then figuring out where you want to jump in is another thing that just helps build that knowledge base, that you want people to be looking around at what's happening and then thinking about, when you come into an interview, how do you process and apply that and feed that back? And so building those skills, thinking about how you'd apply, asking those questions when you go to those networking events, those are skills that translate to a good interview.
Yeah, while my fellow panelists were talking, I was recruiting in the chat. So I would encourage folks to check out our internships. We've got rotation programs, specifically for that purpose, though. It's a great opportunity to see the breadth of just the roles and functions that exist. Again, it's just so much more diverse, really, than I think people perceive this monolithic name of like a cybersecurity professional. I also put in a link to one of the frameworks that's out there that sort of lays out all the different types of roles within the traditional construct. I don't think it covers sort of the lawyers and communicators and project managers, but I wouldn't want to lose sight of that. And one of the questions in the chat was, if I'm one of these folks that maybe doesn't have the technical or cyber specific skills and backgrounds, I think honestly, one of the most difficult things to hire and one of the most needed things to hire are people who aren't just sort of the traditional cybersecurity backgrounds, but they are a skill set or experience base that we need, that have learned enough about cybersecurity in the space to apply their trade. And so looking at legal as an example, lawyers are a dime a dozen. I'll say that jokingly as I work in the legal department at Dell, and maybe some are watching now or on the recording. But security, not dime a dozen, but cybersecurity people you can find. Finding a lawyer who deeply understands cyber and privacy law specifically, and the applications and the evolving landscape where every 3 months a country is passing a new national cybersecurity law that's causing organizations to change our policies and how we, those are the folks that need that unicorn hoodie that Mike's laying out. And so for those on the call who are watching that may have one of those non-traditional backgrounds, but you're interested in cybersecurity, I would highly encourage you to start building some cybersecurity experience again through reading, online learning, maybe a basic level certification course. And you get that blended resume together, it's going to be really powerful.
Yeah, I agree. And I don't have a whole lot to add to that. I think, some good points around find the local communities of interest around you. They are everywhere today for cybersecurity, whether they're, get together over lunch or go to a SANS course or a SANS event, or Cecilia mentioned DEF CON, just wandering around there and getting to know a few people. Just seek out others that have the same and similar interests and build that network.
So in the chat also from Alexandra, they said that they've noticed many jobs or even internships still have requirements that are difficult for someone with little security background to get. What's your recommendation? Is it to get the certification? How could they get in the door?
Apply to companies that are more open-minded. I think some of those on the call, there's huge ramifications to these, artificial HR constructs. I think a lot of organizations still unfortunately lead through in how you structure your job postings and candidacy requirements. Again, for us, we're really looking for people with passion, aptitude, problem-solving skills. Of course, you need some skills and experience relative to the job, but we at least try to structure our outreach in a way that doesn't box out or be exclusionary. I think one of the really exciting things as we sit in 2021 in the session is, we can pretty much hire any role from anywhere in the world now today with what technology is enabling us to do. And so we can get just greater reach to the candidate base, get greater access to diverse, expanded diverse candidates. So I think it's a really exciting time to be more open to get greater candidates in the door. I think a lot of companies, including those on this call, I know feel the same way.
We've had similar questions, I think, in past years about, hey, you guys are all big companies, and I can't seem to get my resume through your automated screening processes, right? And I think our consistent answer year over year, and I still believe in it, is, find a friend, find a person that that has the relationships in those companies, and send them an email, and get to know that person. And it really requires a human in many times to get in the door these days, especially at an internship level. And the cool thing is, like, the world is open now in terms of LinkedIn. I know all of us are out there. So find somebody that is a cybersecurity professional on the LinkedIn system, or some your other favorite website, and don't be afraid to reach out to the person. Corporations, leaders who are sincere about hiring talent will respond back to you.
Yeah, the other thing I'll mention is, if you don't feel like you have like that perfect match or enough of the skills, like, you may have to work a little harder. You may have to reach out, like, in our case, to the recruiters or the people, and really you almost have to sell yourself. You have to say, here's why. And, like, if you're in the process of pursuing like one of those certificates or things, let the recruiter know, make those items, talk about your passion. There are opportunities, but sometimes it's not enough just to submit your resume. So I will say that you may have to be a little bit, apply some of that creative problem solving, but there are ways to get to what Mike said. Get a person on the phone, show the interest, get feedback if you don't make it. All of those things will help you tune the resume and tune your experience so that you can find something that's a good match.
So I'm going to give a little plug here for the session that's coming up this afternoon, because a lot of those recruiters or HR representatives will be on that session this afternoon. It's called Job Search 2021, and they're going to give you tips on all of these things, including networking. I do think networking is really important, but I kind of want to talk just very briefly about what your thoughts are on how you actually bring somebody into the team when we've all been living so disparate lives. We haven't been together. So what have you been doing in order to create that cohesive feeling like I'm part of something big, especially for the new people who are just coming on your team?
I guess I'll start. I think, in the last year and a half, every major corporation, every small corporation, every college and university has had to learn to adapt to a remote and changing world. And the interesting thing is, I think for people who are interested in this field, it wasn't that hard. You have a little bit of a technologist running through your veins when you want to be a cybersecurity person. And so we've done a lot of Zooms, and we're all everybody's getting zoomed out, but it works. And, a lot of us do video meetings and video calls. So you get to see the people you're working with. I've got people on my team that have been on the team for a year now. I've never met them in person. And, I'm really, really excited to do that. I think I see everybody shaking their, we all do. But I think you can still be welcoming, through a virtual environment, and onboard people, have a buddy, just like you would do in person, that helps, get them through the nuances that are the new company and the new career that people have chosen. And I've been trying to figure out a good time for this one, but so, don't be afraid to have some fun with folks, right? It is a stressful work environment. The nation, the world has all been pretty stressed out in the last year and a half for a lot of various reasons, whether it's the pandemic or social issues. It's been a stressful time for everyone. And I think having a little levity in it all is good, and finding ways to have, coffee chats or book clubs or different things with your teams virtually are an important part of building that inclusive environment.
So one of the other questions that came through chat, it was about you guys, we talk about, John, you just mentioned that it can be from anywhere around the globe, but the reality is that if you're a citizen that's outside the United States, it's hard for somebody to get hired by a US company. And another one came in for a private message, Mike, that was about specifically around defense industry and we're working for the government. All three of you have done that. Do you have any, can you make some comments on just how to overcome some of these obstacles that might stop somebody from entering into the field?
There's a few thoughts, I guess. I mean, one, as was said earlier in the session, every organization in the world needs these roles. So firms in the UK need these roles, firms in Malaysia, government of name your country, small town city clerk managing the records of a local town in some random country in Asia. I think that the cybersecurity industry obviously became more prevalent in certain countries over the years. Security companies themselves were more prevalent in certain countries. Certain countries started hiring and investing in cybersecurity earlier than potentially other countries and other portions of the world. I think all of that is beginning to normalize, though, and roles are everywhere. On top of that, most international, global companies have, even if they're U.S. headquartered, have representation across the world and hire overseas, often including cybersecurity professionals. So that's not a broad case, but like at Dell, for instance, I know we have our cybersecurity professionals spread all over the world. The majority of the people aren't in the U.S. In fact, some of our premier hubs are located in both Asia, Europe, all across the globe. So I'd say, I put into the chat at one point, ignore what they say in the job, apply. Just, there's a little bit of sort of tenacity and grit that may be required. It's frustrating when you hear people like us say, oh, well, there's 3 million more jobs than there are available people, and you sat and applied to like 50 jobs last month and haven't heard back from one of them. There's a certain reality to that on the ground, I realize. I think, it is a numbers game, it's a persistence game, so just be persistent, if nothing else, and that would be a broad encouragement.
Yeah, there's a question there from John about UK and US citizenship and things like that. And, to John, to your question, some of the most brilliant people I know in cybersecurity work outside of the United States or citizens of other countries, UK being one, Australia being another, Singapore. It's cool. Most multinational firms have a division in the UK for sure, where you're at, and many other places around the world. And to John's point, you may have to be a little more persistent to find that branch of the business that's located in your particular country. But we're pretty much all out there. 3 global companies here on the phone, and so you can find that job in your backyard. It just might be a little harder to find.
And sometimes you may have to approach it a little differently than would feel obvious. So, NBC Universal is part of the Comcast global family. So it's really 3 companies, right? It's Comcast, it's NBC Universal, and now Sky. Sky is a UK based. It also has Italy and Germany. And so we actually have had people apply for both Sky jobs that run as separate companies. And we also have people in NBC who sit in the UK and Scotland and other places. And so, you may not naturally think if you're in the UK, oh, I'm going to apply for an NBC Universal job, but we do have it there. And sometimes it's US based jobs that we then relocate because you have that ability. So sometimes you can apply to a job, even if it says US, and the company can make those adjustments behind the scenes too.
So we are coming up. Oh, sorry, John, you finished? Because this is, and then we'll come up on the end. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was only going to say, just one more, again, it's a general tip, but if companies aren't open-minded, a big part, it's not just choosing a job, it's choosing a company. So just be thoughtful. And, I think companies that are being more thoughtful in their job postings and how lacking they are restricted and how global they are in nature. It's the old way of doing business to sit and have to see your team, be physically with them, have to be in the same town. Both technology and I think, unfortunately, in large part accelerated by a horrible pandemic, the world is one community right now. And I think modern companies that have inclusive cultures that want to diversify their workforce have that mindset. There's 3 on the call. There's many more out there. And so just be thoughtful, even as you're looking at companies, especially as you get to the point where you realize you are really attractive as a candidate if you're in the cyber field and you have choice. And that's a powerful thing.
Well, as we are coming up, that's actually a great note to end on, John. This has actually been a really important and incredible session. I again thank all of our experts, and Mike, Andrea, John. You guys show up every year. You are amazing people, and you are committed to helping us build out the next generation of cyber warriors. I thank all of you for coming here today. And I'd also like to invite you for that session this afternoon where we will be having the exact things that they talked about. We will be covering how to read the job description and how to make your resume actually apply to that job description. And we'll have another person that will give you interview tips that are from Dell, actually, John, Christine, and Carrie. I know. So we have a great team coming up this afternoon. I'd love for you to join us for that. The other part of RSA conference is open to you now. All the sessions are on demand for the next 2 months, and you can see any session you want to see today. So I'm going to say thanks again to our panel, and thanks to all of you. Bye-bye.